Associate Professor Sender Dovchin is a Principal Research Fellow and Director of Research at the School of Education in Curtin University in Australia. She's also a Discovery Early Career Research Fellow of the Australian Research Council. Previously, she was an Associate Professor at the University of Aizu, Japan. She has also been awarded Young Scientist Award by the Japan Society for the Promotion of Sciences. Professor Dovchin is an editor-in-chief of the Australian Review of Applied Linguistics. She was identified as the top researcher in the field of language and linguistics under the Humanities, Arts and Literature of the Australians 2021 Research Magazine and top 250 researchers in Australia in 2021. She has authored numerous articles in international peer-reviewed journals and authored 6 books with international publishers such as Routledge, Springer, Palgrave, Macmillan, and Multilingual Matters. So with that, it is my pleasure to invite Dr. Sender.
Thank you so much, Natso, for your introduction, and thank you so much for inviting me. Okay, all right. So, thank you so much, everyone, for coming to my talk. I feel very honored, and today I will talk about my research, which is the ordinariness of linguistic diversity in post-socialist Mongolia. So before I start my talk, I would like to acknowledge the sovereign lands of the Whadjuk Noongar people where I live at the moment, and I would like to pay my respect to the elders past, present, and future. Okay, so when we talk about Mongolia, especially when we talk about Mongolia in the Western, in the Western context, Mongolia is usually very much romanticized. Mongolia is portrayed as a remote and grassy land populated by nomadic herders. When I tell people I'm from Mongolia, they're like, "Oh, the Mongolia is a country with a lot of mountains and horses and gear, and it's basically a country in the middle of nowhere." And of course, they know a lot about the horses. Lately, they know a lot about the golden eagle hunters. And of course, the nomadic lifestyle is quite known in the Western world. And also in the West, Genghis Khan, or in the West, we call him Genghis Khan. He is quite popular in the West. So basically, everyone knows Genghis Khan and, of course, the Mongol Empire in the 13th century. But anyway, this is all sort of these romantic ideas or imaginations about Mongolia. Now, if you really go to for example, to Mongolia for a fieldwork trip, for example, and to do the linguistic ethnographic study, or not only linguistic, linguistic anthropological study and so forth, or you can even do the digital ethnography in the Mongolian context. You go to the Mongolian website or Mongolian social media and you can do the digital ethnography. This romanticization about Mongolia being a country in the middle of nowhere or a grassy land and nomadic population is actually very, very different. Especially if you go to the capital city of Mongolia, Ulaanbaatar, for the fieldwork trip, you will be really surprised. You'll be very much stunned by how different it is from the imagination of Mongolia and the Western, knowledge. So, of course, here one Mongolian scholar said the global image of Mongolia is, of course, very much romanticized and projected as a remote and grassy land, but now it's very much, constructed and widely perpetuated. Of course, Mongolia was a socialist country before the satellite of the Soviet Union before 1990. And with the collapse of the Union Socialist Russia, Mongolia made a peaceful transition from a satellite of the Soviet Union to a democratic nation with a free market economy in 1990. So the authorities of Communist Mongolia resigned without confrontation, which marked the end of the 70-year period of the communist regime in Mongolia. And since then, Mongolia opened itself to the outside world, and outside influences have started spreading very quickly across the country. Especially, Mongolia has become the third neighboring countries with the English-speaking countries such as US, UK, Australia perhaps, and Canada. And Mongolia also opened itself not only these English-speaking countries, but also any possible countries in the world. Now, especially young Mongolian people here, they are very much attracted to a global lifestyle, especially the transnational, transcultural, Western lifestyle. Not in nomadic traditions that were generations ago. And they're filled with this desire to reform their every squares of their lives. So as you can see, young Mongolians in the post-socialist context, they are very much globalized. So they are, for example, doing this Voice of Mongolia. Here you can see they go to all these rock and pop artists concerts from not only American or Western pop music, but also even Eastern European and Russian. They watch Korean TV dramas. They go and watch Japanese sumo. So it's basically they're very much positioned between the flows of global cultural and linguistic forms since 1990. So it was, as you can see, it was a very dramatic transformation since 1990. However, with this dramatic transformation, we have Mongolia has a lot of new language ideologies which have started emerging in the country since 1990. So these new ideologies are very much prevalent, and I divide these new language ideologies into local and global ideologies or perspectives. Now, I would like to start with the local ideology first. So local ideology number one. What do I mean by local ideology here? Number one is linguistic purism. So ideology of linguistic purism is basically is the ideology of defining or recognizing one variety of language as pure, intact, and the other aspects of languages are not so pure or contaminated. So that one variety of a language has to stay intact and pure, and that variety of language has this higher quality or higher prestige than the other varieties. So, for example, in Mongolia, the standard Mongolian language, which is the Half Mongolian, is the one variety that is considered as standard Mongolian. When it goes beyond Half Mongolian, sometimes people call it not so pure, contaminated language. So many local scholars and linguists, they have started criticizing the foreign influence, English influence, or other foreign languages in Mongolia in the post-socialist context. For example, the famous scholar Lotengin Tudu, he said that Mongolian border security has not yet violated, but its national language, Mongolian, it is an already very much violated and contaminated language. It's not so pure anymore since the post-socialist context. And also another linguist, Nyamjavin Doshtrato, he says that the spread of English in Mongolian language is an epidemic plague, which has infested the Mongolian language with its head lice. So he, from his point of view, English is like a head lice in the Mongolian language. So this is a very popular sort of, language, local language ideology in Mongolia, linguistic purism. Now, overall, Mongolian young people in the post-socialist context are harshly criticized for distorting the Mongolian language and culture due to foreign languages. And this sentiment was actually addressed in a letter to the Committee of the Comprehensive National Development Strategy of Mongolia in the Mongolian Parliament in 2007. And it was written by a group of renowned Mongolian academics. And the underlying concept of this letter was to protect Mongolian language from these foreign languages and influence and leaving it intact and pure. So the widespread incorporation of various linguistic resources, they have a very much bad influence or impact to the Mongolian language, or maybe even overall national security of Mongolia. Before I move on, so now I would like to show some of the examples here about what is really happening in Mongolia in the post-socialist context, and what is really happening to the Mongolian language here. So in this photograph, you will see the former US President Obama, Barack Obama. And as you can see, right next to him, there is the Mongolian former president, Kakenhi. So as the photograph was about to be snapped, so Obama raised his hand like this to wave for some reason. And the photo captured a smiling Obama with his waving hand, and he completely covering the face of the president of Mongolia, who was standing right next to him. So these photographs actually create a stir amongst the local general population in Mongolia, actually with many young people making jokes and mocking the photo. As you can see here, if you go to the Facebook or if you go to the social media, a lot of people are making lots of parodies about this incident. Here, for example, you can see a group of Mongolian traditional wrestlers standing next to each other, and one standing in the far right, blocking the face of the other wrestler standing next to him. And as you can see here, this photo is captioned as the Hawks Act of Obamification, if you translate it into English. So basically, they're intentionally trying to spoil the photo by blocking the face of the person, by waving hand, and obviously they're using the new sort of, anglicized Mongolian word called Obamatrut, the art of Obamification. This is also popular. It's actually everywhere. A lot of young people use this. This is actually, minors also block each other's face with the shovel and saying the art of Obamification. This is like really a lot across the social media. I can see the thousands and thousands of examples of this, Obamification. And everybody knows the word now, Obamatrut, in Mongolia, So we didn't know this kind of word before 1990. Now everybody uses this word, Obama. Okay, so here I'll just explain some linguistic structure here. So Obama is obviously the surname of the Barack Obama. And then they add the Mongolian sort of suffix "dach," right? So the combination of English, but we have to ask ourselves again, is Obama really English though? Obama is not really English, right? Even though he's an American president, Obama is sort of a Muslim name. And the Mongolian suffix "dach," and this combination makes Obama Turk, right? So it's kind of anglicized Mongolian as I conclude. In other words, another example here, which is very much popular in social media use, imorch. So imorch is like being very emotional, being very emotional, to be emotional. But this word is the combination of the English word emotion and Mongolian, suffixes, roh, law, So this emo, which is the short for English emotional, and the combination of Mongolian suffixes law, raw, they have created a new sort of expression, imora. So she's saying that, she's getting a bit emotional here because she's traveling around the world, and perhaps she got engaged and she's showing her rings, and she's very much imora, or that means, she's very much emotional. Now, this word imora, pretty much every Mongolians use this word, and every Mongolians actually relate with this word, and this is a very popular word right now. Now, we can say that perhaps, Mongolian language has been contaminated by all these, English-related linguistic resources or repertoires, because we have this word Obama, Morla, which have never been in Mongolian language before 1990. So maybe it's contaminated, but are there any other critical ways also to think about it? It's very easy to say, yes, it's contaminated, but we have other critical aspects also to think about it. So I'm looking here the theory of relocalization. Relocalization is the post-structuralist sort of theoretical framework, which is becoming very popular in my field, which is applied linguistics. And we have lots of different sort of terms for this theory, like reintertextualization, resemitization, recontextualization. As you can see, the family tree here. But overall, I call them relocalizations. So why do I call all this theoretical framework as relocalization? Because when people talk certain languages, especially when people are talking, modern people in transnational contexts, they appear to have, they appear to become very dynamic and mobile. And then when they speak certain languages, they use available resources from globalization and transnationalism. So they have access to internet, they have access to media, they have access to computer, social media, and everything. And then they also use these, resources in their everyday lives without even noticing or realizing. So this is truly a transnational sort of linguistic repertoire is happening here. So what is relocalization is basically, it allows, the speaker to use the available linguistic resources they have, and then they just borrow these sort of, linguistic resources, say like Obama or emotional and so forth. And then they mix it with their local language, which is Mongolian, and they make something truly new and local. So they make new local meanings. They make new local practices. They make new languages while doing that. So relocalization is sort of, making new sort of languages and identities while mixing the available resources. Here you can see another example here. Also from the social media. So here the Facebook user is using all these, internet-related words such as pass ID, hack the site. Or here you can see posten posten dimension. Posten dimension. This is also a very popular word in Facebook. So they're all using these Facebook-related words in their Mongolian language, and there's no translation for these words. These are rather, techno-related words. There's no translation, and they are relocalizing these words in Mongolian language, and they're making new meanings out of that and making it really local as well. So I would like to explain it from the theory of ordinariness of linguistic diversity as well. So, for example, if we look at all these languages, or especially all these new terms being relocalized into the Mongolian language, maybe, some people would argue that it is really being contaminated and Mongolian language is not so pure anymore. But if we really look at the ordinariness of the linguistic diversity theory, for example, the scholar Stephen May, he argues that, this sudden multilingual turn or linguistic diversity in urban bi-multilingual studies has its own ironies, because this linguistic diversity is not solely the product of late modernity or globalization or transnationalism, because it has already been in the earlier periods of history, in the human history, particularly prior to the advent of nationalism and the nation state. Whereas Sugiharto argues that multilingualism, linguistic diversity, translingualism, they have always been the part of the pre-modernity or pre-colonial activities. If we, for example, look at the evolution of English from the tribal dialects of Angles and Jutes and Saxons to its standardization through the development of printing, linguistic diversity has always been there. So we also need to look at the linguistic diversity from the ordinariness. It has always been there. It has always been the part of the human history. And also, if we look at the late Qin, empire, late Qin empire was very much multilingual. They had Manchu, Mongolian, Chinese, Tibetan, Uyghur languages, and they all existed together. Now, going back to the Mongolian language, am I okay with the time? Going back with the Mongolian language. Yeah, okay. So going back with the Mongolian language. Okay, so English has arrived, Japanese language has arrived, German arrived in Mongolia, and Mongolian language is being really contaminated. So But how about before 1990? Let's go back to before 1990, the Soviet-style Mongolia. You know, Russian language was very much popular in the in the Soviet Mongolia. When Mongolia was a communist nation, Russian language was an important foreign language for everything, for political discourse, for social mobility, and the vast popularity of Russian movies, cuisine, art, literature, you know, they were very much popular in Mongolia. And actually, in fact, dramatically, the Mongolian orthographic system was converted into Russian Cyrillic. And Mongolia adapted the Russian Cyrillic, replacing the classic Mongolian Uyghur script in 1946 as part of the Soviet policy to standardize all minority languages in the former Soviet Union. And together with the big influence of Russian language, Mongolian language has started relocalizing a lot of Russian expressions and phrases. Now, if you look here, just Google some public website about, kino. And then kino is basically, it's a Mongolian word now, you know. The most, impressive movie that you have seen. And kino is now very much used as part of the Mongolian language, but it was actually relocalized from the Russian language in the Soviet time. And if you look at the answer here, so the tankists, right? It's also borrowed from Russia. Not borrowed, like relocalized. So Tangching is now tankists. So you can see here in Mongolian language, some Mongolian people, they don't even realize like Tangching or Kino is actually relocalized Russian. They treat it as, original, pure Mongolian. But I would argue that, before 1990, when Mongolia was a socialist country, we also had linguistic diversity. So this is actually very much ordinary experience. Here is another Russian influence, Russianized Mongolian. So Patsang is very much Mongolian word right now, which means kids, right? But it's also relocalized from the Russian language, Patsang. And Mongolian language has also been very much, open into the linguistic diversity. And we have lots of Chinese, relocalized words here. So Huanli is actually a relocalized word from Chinese, which is Huangli. So Huanli means calendar in Mongolian, and everybody thinks, assumes that it's a Mongolian word. And here is our favorite Mongolian dish, which is traditional Mongolian food, hoshur. But hoshur is actually, it was relocalized from Chinese hao shao. So but right now it's deemed as Mongolian, it's a traditional Mongolian food, and so forth. So what I'm trying to argue here really is linguistic diversity in Mongolia has already been there. It has been the basic practice of Mongolian linguistic landscape before 1990. Local ideology number 2 in Mongolia is also linguistic imperialism. So linguistic imperialism is a theory coined by theorists Robert Philipson and Tove Skelton-Kangas. So linguistic imperialism is basically refers to the global spread of English is not only leading to the loss of linguistic and cultural diversity, but also it's bringing social, political, and economic inequalities in the world. English-speaking Western nations use English to suppress the other non-English-speaking nations around the world. And we call it linguistic imperialism. English is defined as the imperialistic language because of its constant structural and cultural inequalities between English and other languages. Together with English linguistic imperialism, also there is the terms such as Americanization, Westernization, and even they have terms such as McDonaldization and Coca-Colization. These things are really imperializing the world. There's only English, there's only Americanization, so this is the imperialism. And this ideology of linguistic imperialism is very popular in post-Soviet Mongolian context as well, especially Mongolian academics. They argue that, Mongolian language is already losing its identity. For example, the Mongolian professor of Mongolian language and culture, Nadin, says in his popular blog, weird, dim-witted, arrogant, monkey-like identities with Mongolian names and Mongolian facial features are growing fast due to the pollution of the native language. Or Galden argues that the language used by young Mongolians is an orphan language, which has lost its owners. So basically what they're saying is Mongolian language is being imperialized by English, and and we're losing the identities here. Now, let's have a look at the other examples in terms of linguistic and cultural imperialism in the post-Soviet context. If you look at the Mongolian young people, especially in the urban context, you will see a lot of linguistic diversity, especially in popular music. Now, one of the most famous or popular one is Mongol pop. So Mongol pop is basically a style of music, a genre of popular music originating in Mongolia. So this is influenced by the Mongolian art, history, traditional Mongolian instruments, but this is also mixed with the Western American hip hop, R&B, reggae, and so forth. So he is the famous Mongolian singer called Bolt, and he actually, sort of started this music genre in Mongolia. So as you can see, in his Mongol pop, musical genre, he also used a lot of English linguistic resources. He uses Western cultural resources, but then again, he's very much focused on the traditional Mongolian aspects as well. Let's have a look at The Who. The Who is one of the also very popular music band in Mongolia nowadays. And The Who is also like Mongol pop. They use traditional Mongolian musical instruments such as moringhur, tofshur, throat singing, which is homi. And then they are also very much heavy, influenced by the Western heavy metal rock, such as Metallica, Rammstein, and System of a Down. And, they also use a lot of Mongolian historical heritage resources, such as Mongolian shamanism. And they also use the chants from Mongol Empire and Genghis Khan, but also they use a lot of contemporary issues that is happening in Mongolia. And they are becoming very much popular in the West at the moment. And from their interview extracts, they're saying that our music is the blend of the East and West, old and new. And we are building on a history and sound that has been around for thousands of years. And as Mongolians, we are raised to have a great respect for our history. So nature is in our voices, and human beings are connected to each other and so forth. So what I'm trying to say here is they actually have created a new identity, which is called the Who rock in the post-socialist context in Mongolia. The Who rock didn't exist before, and they have relocalized the available resources to them. Such as, not only they use English, but also they use Mongolian, but also they use all these traditional Mongolian resources, but also they use Western style music, and they create something really new, which is called the Who rock. So if we look at if we try to analyze all these examples from the perspective of, for example, linguistic imperialism, we need to ask ourselves, are they really being imperialized by English? Or are there any other ways to think about it? Because they're creating something really new. And then through this Who rock, for example, they want to express themselves as who they are, as young Mongolians, as modern Mongolians. This is who they are as Mongolians who are living in the post-Soviet, post-socialist context. And I would like to get back to the ordinariness of linguistic diversity theory here. So if we look at this, these examples in Mongolia, especially in post-socialist contexts, for example, the scholar Yanis Andropoulos, he argues that in this age of digital technologies, the relocalization of media content seems to be a very basic practice for young rap artists and internet users. So for Who or that Mongol pop, singer Ball, it's actually a very ordinary, basic practice rather than rather than something very, unconventional. Another scholar, Serba Leppinen, argues that, it might seem very much unconventional to see these, new jargons mixed with English and Finnish context. But for these Finnish online users, it is actually the daily linguistic repertoires, and they show a great amount of familiarity with these terms. So this is actually very ordinary practice for these young people. Now, I argued about this linguistic diversity, ordinariness of linguistic diversity in Mongolian popular music in my 2 books here. So if you're interested in this, you can have a look at my books and in more details. Now, I'll quickly talk about the global ideologies here, but I know my time is almost up. So what are the global language ideologies here? We just talked about the local ideologies. So especially in the global north and the Western society, the Western researchers, they seem to romanticize linguistic diversity. For example, if I say, look, Mongolian young people, they're mixing their language. Mongolian young people have a very, this diverse linguistic landscape. They have this huge linguistic diversity going on. And then as soon as I say that, most of the Western applied linguists and scholars would be like, they tend to romanticize the linguistic, diversity. They would say, wow, that is so creative. That is so exciting. We've never seen such thing, right? So they have this very romantic idea about linguistic diversity. And that is very dangerous, because when you start romanticizing about the language creativity or language invention, you are also in the danger of exoticization. So exoticization is, it's some sort of, you're excluding these people, this group, as very, weird speaking people or substandard speaking people. The people who are speaking this language, they are not speaking the real language. It's just an exotic language, So they tend to exoticize linguistic diversity in the West. For example, here the hip hop group Ice Top, and this is one of the lyrics from the song. So they're singing байж байгаад арчи японд очиж байгаад 3 сарын хацуу байшаа 50% хийдгээрээ хийчихэд Takamisakarik Tsupartsi. So they're rapping like this. But you can see here lots of Japanese, for example, resources. Hatsubashio, Takamisakari, Tsupari, and so forth. And then as soon as Western scholars look at this kind of linguistic diversity, they call it a very exotic language, and they start celebrating it as linguistic diversity. But if you really go to the Mongolian linguistic landscape, this is not actually very exotic, or this is not actually very surprising, because this is related with the large popularity of Mongolian Sumer since 1990 in post-socialist context. A lot of Mongolian young men go to Japan, and they become the Japanese sumo wrestling champions and yokozunas, including Asashori and Hakuho. And, Mongolians are very, very much addicted watching to Japanese sumo. And for them, using this kind of sumo-related Japanese word in the Mongolian language is very much ordinary. It's nothing exotic. It's nothing, different. So back to the ordinariness of linguistic diversity, I would argue that being bi-multilingual or being linguistically diverse is actually neither rare or nor exotic practice. Since to many people around the world, it never did. Even, history shows that it never did. And linguistic diversity is neither to celebrate or not to deplore, but something we need to just observe and examine with interest like anything else. I also argue, following the Higgins and Cohen's argument, we as Homo sapiens, actually, in terms of, genetic structure and cognitive potential, we are all the same. Yet as human beings, we have anything in common but our differences. So the ordinariness of diversity, hence, is the given reality of human social action. And it doesn't have to be found, it's already there. And the sameness of the difference argument by Alistair Pennycook. It is about the same item being different, and an understanding of difference is the norm, while sameness as in need of explanation. So language mixing or linguistic diversity in the post-socialist Mongolia could be about the sameness that is also different. So these ordinariness of diversity, linguistic diversity argument, I have made these arguments a lot in these 2 books, if you're interested. Now, I would like to finish my presentation by saying that every living language is relocalized, and every living language always changes, and it's quite ordinary. But there are always differences, and differences are apparent in specific time, context, and space. For example, it's not so surprising that the language of Shakespeare should be markedly different from the English we use today, or in our English we use almost 4 centuries later. Or it is not so surprising that the language of the Mongol Empire in the 13th century should be markedly different from Mongolian language we use today. I would like to, this is the special issue I have published with my colleague Jerry Won Lee, and we call it the ordinariness of translinguistics. So here we argue that we need to look at the ordinariness of diversity in more seriously. We also argue that, as Heraclitus argued, that we step and we do not step in the same rivers. We are and we are not. So this is what Heraclitus famously argued. And then we also want to say that, we need to study the science of the language. We also need to study the art of the language. And we need to develop our critical senses to learn how to understand these languages. And we need to realize that everything in the language or in the linguistic diversity connects to everything else, present, past, and future, and time, context, and space. As Socrates argued, that you will never know that divine is so great and of such a nature that it sees and hears everything at once, is present everywhere, and is concerned with everything. So that means that ordinariness of linguistic diversity should be understood based on that specific social linguistic history, background, and place and time and space we are currently living. And this is my last book, where I also argue about these differences and ordinariness. Thank you so much. That's the end of my presentation.
All right, thank you, Dr. Sender. Now we are ready for the Q&A until 10 o'clock GMT, or 10 a.m. EST, or 11 p.m. Ulaanbaatar time. I think we have our first question from Nurjan. We have been informed that you have been contributing significantly to the policy development of the Government of Australia through your research endeavor to minimize social injustice. Regarding the exoticism of the language that often results in social exclusion, how researchers and linguists collaborate to build the awareness for the public in non-English speaking context. It could be an approach for the maintenance of language identity. Do you intend to have any plans to extend your research in such context? Thanks a million.
Okay, sorry, I need to read this again because. So you have been informed that you have been contributing significantly to the policy development of the Government of Australia through your research endeavour to minimize social injustice. Regarding the exoticism of the language often results in social exclusion, yes, I agree. And how researchers and linguists collaborate to build the awareness for the public in non-English speaking context. It could be an approach for the maintenance of language identity. Do you intend to have any plans to extend your research in such context? So thank you for this question, Nurjan. And thank you so much for participating in my research. So not research, participating in my talk. So I think I do agree with the fact that, when you exoticize the language or diversity, especially in English-speaking context, you tend to sort of exclude, the linguistic minority groups. So that is very much, the finding of my research. Now, so in non-English speaking contexts, so I think it's very important to raise public awareness in terms of, ordinariness of linguistic diversity, because people have very much monolingual mindset. What do I mean by monolingual mindset is people think that, the certain language should stay as it is, like linguistic purism, and then based on that strong linguistic ideology, they have this idea that, the people who are speaking unstandard language, they are not doing very well. And it's very difficult in dominant English-speaking countries, because usually most of the migrants, they speak, they don't speak standard Australian English. They speak their own sort of twists and tweaks, own sort of English. And then as soon as they speak different English, they start, getting exoticized, or they become the victims of linguistic racism. So I think it's very important to build the public awareness. And also, I agree, it could be an approach for the maintenance of the language identity. Yes, as I mentioned about creating new identities based on the mixture. So as I can say, as soon as you speak, it's a big part of your identity. So we need to also raise awareness in that. And do you intend to have any plans to extend your research in context? Well, I think I am doing research. When I started my research in linguistic diversity in post-socialist Mongolia, I only wanted to look at what is really diverse in Mongolia, so what kind of languages are very popular in Mongolia after collapse of the Soviet Union in 1990. So that's how I started. But then as soon as I started having a lot of question marks about how to think about this linguistic diversity in Mongolia, and how are these local, conflicting ideologies are very much conflicting each other. So these questions actually expanded my next research project, which is linguistic racism, which is in the context of Australia. So my research on ordinariness of linguistic diversity is very much related to my current project, linguistic racism. And of course, I'm intending to extend my research in the future. For sure.
Thank you. So we have some people, thanking you for your interest, and very interesting and well-executed talk, both on the Facebook live stream and on the Zoom chat. And another question, Philip Nichols asks, are there words that have been created solely within Mongolian without borrowing from other languages to deal with changes in society, technology, etc.? If so, are those words treated differently than words that borrow from other languages?
I think this is also part of the linguistic diversity question, because sometimes Mongolians or Mongolian linguists, they seek to create their own Mongolian version, So for example, when they say social media or when they say Facebook, they try to replace it with the Mongolian version, and they totally, sort of trying to reinvent their own Mongolian language, own Mongolian way, so that they would not, contaminate Mongolian language. For example, Facebook, Nurnom, okay? Nurnom. But I actually, in my opinion, from my, point of view, these Mongolian way of saying words are not necessarily as widely used as the actual words, actual terms. I think the social media users in post-Soviet, post-socialist context, they tend to use the original version relocalized into Mongolian rather than just created just for the sake of the purity. So that's my answer. That's my response for that. And are those words treated differently than words that borrow from other languages? In Inner Mongolia, Inner Mongolians, they do speak a lot of, they do speak sort of this old version of Mongolian, and sometimes they tend to use this very old way of expressing themselves in Mongolian, and they get mocked by, Mongolians. So I'm not sure I have to answer to that, because this is also the local conflict, ideological conflict there. Because when Inner Mongolians using really this, Mongolia, when they express themselves in a very Mongolian way, sometimes they also get mocked by the Mongolians. So that would be my response for this.
Contributed selfie. What is the Mongolian word for selfie now? Did we have?
I don't know. Does anyone know what's selfie in Mongolian?
That's a good question. Oruk, yeah, Oruk.
Uruk. Oh my God.
Yes,
how does it work, Uruk? I don't think majority of Mongolians know this word Uruk.
I can see that it's a portmanteau between Oro and Zoruk, right? Uruk. Oh, okay, very smart. That's. But yeah, a lot of people just say selfie, which
just selfie. We've got 10 more minutes if you have any other questions or.
We have another one from another comment from Bayertsik about the word orc, and a question from Zoljaval, who said, I found the part on Western imperialism and how it's affecting Mongolian language very intriguing. Are you working on any papers linked to decolonizing in the context of languages? Yeah.
Lately, I'm very much interested in decolonizations from the global south. So I'm looking at a lot of theories in global, from a global south perspective or a southern perspective, how to decolonize, the local context and so forth. So this is actually a very interesting topic. And I actually started reading a lot about how, decolonization, southern perspectives, global south perspectives, and so forth. So, yes.
Okay. And Mukhchimig asks, how many languages do you speak?
Not many. It's just the ordinariness of linguistic diversity. So, obviously, I'm Mongolian. So, I just use whatever available linguistic resources I have. But basically, as a identity, I do speak, of course, Mongolian, and I do speak English. I do speak a little bit of Russian, a little bit of Japanese, and that's pretty much it. Yeah.
All right. We have another question. Sitzing asks, don't you think the ubiquity of linguistic diversity cannot be argued in the context of, let's say, US, a multicultural melting pot, and, for example, Mongolia, a culturally insecure place in constant guard of its linguistic purity, which I cannot blame on a normative level?
Yeah, of course. Through this presentation, I'm not trying to say the ideology of linguistic purity is bad, or ideology of linguistic purity is good, and so forth. What I'm trying to say is just in a very sort of from the perspective of researcher and scholar, from very much outsider's view. I've tried to be very critical in terms of this thinking and arguments. Okay, so it's very easy just to say we need to leave the Mongolian language linguistically pure, but then and if English is imperializing Mongolian language and so forth, but then how about Mongolian language has also been relocalized by Russian Cyrillic, and now Mongolians think that Russian Cyrillic is the Mongolian language, and Mongolian, they don't want, for example, the Russian Cyrillic, Mongolian Cyrillic being transformed into, for example, Romanized Mongolian. So through my argument, what I'm trying to say is, linguistic diversity is actually not really that. Linguistic diversity it has always been there in the human history. So we need to see it more critically. Otherwise, if we're just, sticking to these strong language ideologies, then, we don't know what's going to happen. So I think the multiple critical points in arguments are always good.
So Mukhchimig asks, do you ever get concerned about or extremely careful when expressing yourself in non-native language because of your deep specific linguistic related studies / profession?
No, I don't. Actually, I consider myself just a critical scholar, critical, theorist. So I don't have to worry about how I speak. So I don't actually think that, people should get nervous or people should get self-conscious when they speak, because, as I said, when you speak certain language, or language is part of your identity or your sense of belonging. So why do you have to be, self-conscious about that? You should be proud, and you should perform your identity, construct your identity through how you speak. So.
Thank you. Yeah, that is a great answer. So now, Gigantul, would you mind? You can, since you raised your hand, you can open your mic and ask it.
Yeah, thank you for this interesting talk, Dr. Sender. Yeah, I just thought about this recent the show I watched recently on Mongolian TV, which is the name is called Ukhl, and there she talked about this teaching of Doha in Hubskul, and which is one branch of Towa language, I think, in Mongolia. So, and they even started to compile some textbooks for those children. Obviously, only people over 65 years old, and they can speak it quite fluently, but the younger generation are all switching to Mongolian. And I'm thinking, have you thought about how to say studying or researching those diverse minority languages in Mongolia itself? And how about this their diversity, and what do you think about the current government's this move in revitalizing or reteaching this language in schools?
I think it's very important to revitalize heritage. I think it's very important to revitalize minority languages in the dominant society, because they are the languages which is really facing the threat of, extinction. So, for example, in Australian context, we have lots of Aboriginal Australian languages which are in the brink of extinction, and now Australian applied linguists are doing a lot of revitalization projects and programs to get these languages, continue. So this is also very similar practice in Mongolia. In Mongolia, we do have some minority languages, Kazakh, right? So, but then I know many young Kazakh people who are, in Mongolia. They also mix a lot of Mongolian when they speak, and actually sometimes they are discouraged to speak Kazakh, right? So I think as linguists, we need to really support and we really need to advocate for, revitalization of heritage and minority languages, so that we can keep also the ordinariness of diversity. And this is our linguist job, but also, also language policymakers, language educators. We all need to work together, to government authorities. We all need to work together to pass it on to the next generation, because language is usually passed on from one generation to another generation, and the other generation, if they don't pass it on, actually it may face the extinction. So I'm a big advocate for revitalization of minority language.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sender, for joining us from.
Thank you very much, everyone. And if you want to contact me, just email me, please. I'm very much contactable through emails, Twitter, social media, very open to conversations.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sender.
You're welcome. Bye.